for the webinar. This is the third in a series of 6 webinars that our founder, Dr. Ivan Meisner, has agreed to do for us. And I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Ivan Meisner. Dr. Meisner?
Thank you very much, Mac. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. I've got a short message here for you, and then we'll jump right into today's webinar. Let's get this. I know I can do this. Hang on. Good morning, BNI India. This is Dr. Ivan Meisner, founder of BNI, and I am really excited to do this webinar this morning. Today we'll be talking about BNI on fire, on hold, or in a hole. And what this presentation is all about is about chapter cycles. And how all chapters go through cycles where things are going fantastic and really well, and then they start to slide a little bit, and then the chapters have some problems. And the key is to really catch it early and work on turning it around. And I'm going to be talking about all 3 phases, what you can do about it, and most importantly, I'm going to be opening it up for Q&A towards the end of the presentation. Plenty of time for Q&A. Before we get started, though, let me just reiterate that I am so proud of BNI India. India has done incredibly well in BNI. And I so enjoyed my last visit. I look forward to coming back again. But I am so proud of your country and of BNI in your country. You have set world records in the organization, seriously, world records. And you should be very proud of yourselves as well, because I certainly am. All right, well, let's get started. Today's webinar is on fire, on hold, or in a hole. Okay, everybody, let's get started. I've got just 1 or 2 little technical difficulties here, but let me fix those. And that was a brief video message because I'm having difficulty doing my video camera and the PowerPoint at the same time. So here we go. I really do mean it about how impressed I am with BNI India. You guys have done an amazing job. You should be very proud of yourselves. I certainly am very proud of the work that you have done there. What I'm going to be talking about today is chapter cycles. And before I jump into chapter cycles, let me give you a couple of housekeeping matters. I will be taking questions, plenty of questions. This particular presentation lends itself to have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask the question. Use the questions bar on your dashboard. And on that question bar, just type in your question and send it to me. You do have the opportunity to raise your hand. I will not be answering any raised hands. If you have a question, just ask the question. If you would like to ask your question via mic, feel free to say that in the question. You know, here's my question, could you open my mic? And I'm happy to open your mic so you can actually ask the question. I think in some ways that goes even better. So I'll be opening it up for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can either text your question to me or type your question into me, or you can let me know that you would like me to open the mic and you can ask your question. All right, here we go. Chapter cycles. This topic on hold, on fire, on hold, or in a hole is really about chapter cycles and understanding what phase you are in. When I started BNI in 1985, I pretty quickly saw chapters that went through different phases. Really, even within the first year, I saw chapters start to go through different phases, or they began the chapter in you know, maybe not an on fire phase. And over time, more and more, I saw these consistent 3 phases. Chapters were either really excited, or they were just kind of complacent, or they were struggling. And so this is what I want to talk about. You walk into some chapters and they're absolutely on fire. They're energized. They're goal-oriented. They're thriving. And most importantly, they're reporting high dollar values with their thank you for closed business. While others basically are on hold. They just go through the motions, doing the minimum and getting average results. Then there are others that seem to be in this hole, always struggling with attendance, not holding members accountable, not excited, having difficulty maintaining strong relationships, getting people who constantly complain. Stop for a moment and think to yourself, where is my group relating to these three phases? Now be honest, where do you think your group stands? On fire, on hold, or in a hole? If you think your group is on fire, then let me congratulate you. That was my vision for what a great BNI experience should be about. If your group is on hold, trust me when I say it doesn't take a lot to move from this phase to on fire. I've seen many groups do that in a really short period of time. If your group's in a hole, don't despair. You can be an incredible group. Believe me, I've seen it. The exciting thing is that it is actually possible to leapfrog over the middle right to an on-fire group fairly quickly with the right leadership team and a full commitment of all your members. All groups go through cycles or phases. It happens. It happens. When I started BNI and the very first chapter I was in, I could see the phases take place while I was in the chapter. It's okay. The key is to recognize the cycles and know when it's time to up your game. Why accept mediocrity when excellence is an option? Excellence is an option, and I see it every day in BNI chapters all around the world. Let's look closer at these three phases. First, on fire. On fire groups are chapters that are not willing to settle for mediocrity. They are the biggest, the best, the most productive, the most positive chapters for members to be in. Their leadership teams are committed to the BNI policies, guidelines, and the system. Their members attend virtually all the trainings offered by the local region, often several times. You'll find many members with several ribbons attached to their badges, denoting the many roles that they've played in the chapter: visitor host, education coordinator, member success program graduate, and so on. These members often quote BNI podcast episodes to me when I meet them, and I love that. I remember my last visit to India, and people were asking me, I remember what you said on episode number 127, and sometimes I don't know what one of the podcasts that are being mentioned, where I don't recall the number. And I love it when BNI members can quote the podcast and the podcast number. And it's just, I find that very impressive. And those are generally from people from chapters that are definitely on fire. Most of the members in these groups have fully completed their BNI Connect profiles, including member testimonials. They count their CEUs from the many trainings that they've attended. They're actively passing referrals online and reporting them to the chapter each weekly meeting. It's common to hear many stories from these chapters about extremely lucrative connections. They always report far higher thank you for closed business than their counterparts in the same region. In other words, other chapters in the same region. The excitement level at their chapter meetings is simply electric. I don't know how else to describe it. It's simply electric. Chapters in this phase exude high energy and a very positive attitude. The chapters are likely to try most or all of the ideas offered by their director. They effectively utilize one-to-ones, worksheets like the gains exchange or the chapter reality check. These are the things that chapters on fire do. They tend to have full or very, very full attendance at member success program training. They use meeting stimulants developed by BNI, and their education coordinators regularly review SuccessNet online articles or BNI podcast episodes each week. These are the kinds of things that Chapters on Fire do consistently, especially attending those MSP trainings. In addition, they tend to operate in a very friendly environment. They have a great culture of support and positivity. They have more members than the average. They generate a lot of referrals, and they enforce accountability in the group. That's an important one. They enforce accountability in the group. They're there to do business, but they also understand the importance of adhering to a structure. Most importantly, they don't let either business or the structure get in the way of having fun and developing close relationships. In other words, they balance all of these important factors very, very effectively. Those are chapters that are on fire. Let's talk for a moment about chapters that are on hold. In this phase, chapters have become somewhat complacent. They may have been in the on fire phase at one time and lost some of the spark that made them successful. Or they may be a smaller chapter that has begun to give up on growth and has accepted the status quo. A chapter that is going through this phase tends to believe that things are okay. Yeah, things are pretty good as they are. We don't have any pressing desire to work on enhancing the meetings or developing the quality or the quantity of members. They may feel like the amount of business that they're doing is okay, even if it's not great. They may take some suggestions offered by their directors, but they're just as likely to dismiss other suggestions because they think they don't apply to them or they feel that they know best. This tends to happen with chapters that have been around a little while. They tend to follow many, but not all of the policies and the basic structure of the meetings, but they have lost the enthusiasm and the spirit that makes them a great group. There's a really good book that I recommend called Good to Great by Jim Collins. Many of you may have read it. Good to Great by Jim Collins. And he said something in there that I think is very interesting. He said, you know, what is the enemy of great? And one assumes that the enemy of great is bad or poor service, poor quality is the enemy of great. And he argues that it's not, that bad is not the enemy of great, but in fact, good is the enemy of great. Good is the enemy of great. And I don't know if you have, but I've certainly heard people say, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, here's my least favorite. That's good enough. That's good enough. And it's in those kinds of attitudes that good becomes the enemy of great, when there is so much more that's possible, but people settle. And when people are settling for what exists as opposed to focusing on what's possible, that's when if a chapter in mass is doing that, that's where a chapter is on hold. Now let's talk about the third category. The third category. And we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. The third category. In a hole. Chapters in this phase tend to have numerous problems. Problems with attitudes, problems with referrals, almost always problems with attendance. They're almost always lower than the groups in other phases I've discussed. Unfortunately, most of the membership is focused on the problems and not on positive solutions. I have found that when chapters or people focus on problems and not the solutions, they become an expert at the problem, but they don't have any solutions. Let me repeat that. When people focus on problems rather than solutions, they become an expert at the problem, but they can't offer up any solutions whatsoever. I think that that's where these groups live as a group. And when they're in a hole, they live on being so focused on the problem, they can't focus on a solution. I see that even more often with individual people, and individual people can, if they're loud enough and boisterous enough, can move a chapter in that direction. But individual people who are just so obsessed with the problems. I had someone at my house this week who was so obsessed with problems. She wasn't in BNI, but she was so obsessed with all the problems, she could not focus on any solutions. None. I wasn't even willing to listen to possible solutions or consider possible solutions. And when someone is in a position like this, they really need a wake-up call. And sometimes it may not be a good fit when you have somebody in a chapter who just won't attempt to focus on the solutions. Now, I have seen chapters in a whole where the chapter, many of the members were focused on the problems, and someone in that group kind of showed them the light and said, hey, we could be a lot better. We can do better. This is what's possible. And get people to start focusing on the solutions. But this is an important one. When they're focused on problems and not solutions, they're almost always in a hole. Chapters in a whole also tend not to follow the agenda as well, the structure or the policies. In addition, they often view their local director as an outsider rather than a resource to coach and support them to help make the BNI process work. BNI directors are a resource for local chapters. It's important for the local chapters to use that resource to their benefit. These chapters that are in a hole tend to make many exceptions for the actions of their members. And they generally seek the path of least resistance. I often say people like water tend to seek the path of least resistance. They tend to do what's easiest as opposed to what is best. And oftentimes what's best is not the path of least resistance. It's a difficult path to go. Chapters in a whole, it's hard for them to grow and succeed until they have what I call a reset of the mindset. A reset of the mindset. And that process begins by recognizing the phase they're in and working with their director to get back on track. And this is absolutely possible. I've seen it happen many, many times where a chapter has come to the realization that they're on hold or in a hole and said, okay, someone in the group said, okay, enough's enough. We can turn this around. What's it take? Almost all chapters go through the phases or cycles listed that I've listed in this presentation. However, the really successful chapters tend to spend more time in the on-fire phase than either of the other two phases. However, even highly successful chapters can kind of get into the on-hold phase from time to time. But really successful chapters tend to spend more time on fire. Once again, consider where your chapter is in these cycles. There is a really good tool that you can use to take a look at the quality of your chapter. It's called Rate Your Chapter, and it's in it's in a couple of episodes actually. One of them is episode number 480. Rate Your Chapter, and it's a PDF that's embedded in the podcast, and you can use that or something like that to take a look at your chapter and say, okay, where are we in this process? How strong are you? Wherever you are in that process, if you take the averages in that rate your chapter and say, my average is low here in these points, then those are the areas we need to focus on. Even a chapter on fire can do the rate your chapter and improve by just taking a look at what areas they didn't do as strong in as other areas. So when you sit down and look at your chapter or you do a rate your chapter, if you determine that you're in the on hold or in a hold phase, contact your director to get some suggestions on how you can help the group achieve excellence. BNI has thousands of groups in dozens of countries. With that many groups, we've landed on the right combination of passion, on structure, on accountability, and culture to make groups work. Don't reinvent the wheel. The process works very well for chapters that effectively use the tools and assistance that BNI provides. 32 years of doing this program. Why accept mediocrity when excellence is an option? Why accept mediocrity when excellence is an option? Chapters who really believe in that are on the road to becoming chapters that are on fire. Now, one thing I've seen in India and in other countries is a lot of passion for our philosophy of giver's gain, a lot of passion for BNI and the BNI system, and I love that. And I don't think anything great has ever been accomplished without a little bit of passion, but passion alone does not produce results. Passion and commitment produce results. Passion alone does not produce results. Passion and commitment produce results. I've seen people who were really passionate about something, but not terribly committed. I've seen people who were committed, but not really passionate about it. And people who are passionate, but not committed can rile people up, but not create something successful. People that are passionate, but not committed make excellent critics because they can critique something, but they can't run something. By the way, nobody's ever built a statue to a critic. It's easy to be passionate when you're not happy with something. It's hard to be passionate about something and then put it to work, and it's that commitment that counts. I've seen people who are committed but not very passionate, and they can't get people on board with them. I believe that in order to make a BNI chapter successful, you need a group of people that are both passionate and committed. And through that passion and commitment, you can produce amazing, amazing results within the organization. All right, I promised you you'd have plenty of time for Q&A, and you do. We've got just over 30 minutes to do some Q&A. I do want to remind you that the Rate Your Chapter and this whole concept of on fire, on hold, or in a hole can be found on podcast number, episode number 480. So if you go to episode number 480 of the BNI podcast, you'll find that Rate Your Chapter and some of the stuff that I've been talking about here today. So let's start tackling some of these questions, and I'm going to take them in the order that I get them for the most part. There was one question that came on board before I started, and I'm trying to look here. Help me out with the names here, Mac. Is that Gaurav? The first
Gaurav,
one?
yeah.
Gaurav.
Yeah, Gaurav.
Yeah, and he asks, can we download the content of the webinar? I will make this webinar available to Mac. Did you make the previous one available to members, Mac?
Yes, it goes out in the newsletter, and I can also send it out again.
Great.
All the ones that have been recorded have gone out.
So this recording will go as well, okay? So let's look here. Next one. Hi, Ivan. How do you address, and this comes from, is it Sharon?
Sharon. Yeah, Sharon.
Hi, Ivan. How to address when visitors have already visited bigger chapters and he visits a smaller chapter, and as a visitor normally, they carry a hunting mode and would have seen larger thank you slips and referral compared to smaller chapter. Need an elevator pitch for this. So look, it's going to happen. If you believe that because you're a smaller chapter, you won't get them, you'll be correct every time. The size of the chapter alone is not the single most important thing. It's important, but it tends to be important when you're looking at, smaller groups rather than larger groups. If you have chapters of over 50 members, and I don't know what size your chapter is, whether it's 50 members or 70 members, I don't think a visitor is going to, as a rule, go to one versus another just because it's got a few more members. Now, if a chapter has 20 members, that's a whole different ballgame. They may not join your chapter. It is harder. But let me tell you a story. True story. And it's the reason that we started doing something in BNI that is part of our system now and has been for more than 30 years. When I started BNI, we didn't have anyone welcoming visitors that came in. Now remember, this is 1985. There was no internet. I mean, think about the technology today. I'm talking to you online with graphics and video, and you're asking questions. I'm able to respond. Back then, we couldn't do any of this. There was no internet. Telephone bills in the U.S. were very expensive. The second largest line item in my budget after personnel, after salaries, the second largest item was my telephone bill, because the telephone bill was very expensive to call all around the country, and then when we became international, very expensive. Today, I couldn't even tell you where the phone bill was. It is in our budget. It's buried there under something. I tell you this because when I started BNI, I assumed that if you invited someone to BNI, they were going to come to your chapter. And what I learned was that as we grew and became a larger organization and started to spread all across Southern California, people would show up at chapters that they didn't get invited to. I mean, they would be invited to one chapter and say, that's too far away from me, and they would go visit another chapter. And what I learned was that the way I set up BNI is that if you invited a visitor, you had to be their host. It would be like you inviting someone to your party. You want to welcome them and make them feel welcome to the group. The problem was that people were now showing up to chapters that they didn't have a host because nobody invited them. They, met somebody who was in another group, and they are then attending this chapter, having never been to a group before. And the problem they ran into was surprising to me. I'll tell you a true story of this one woman who went to a chapter that it was close to 40 members. Now, look, back in the 80s, a 40-member chapter was big. Today, a 40-member chapter is good. But with India, you've got so many chapters, over 50, 60, 70, 100 members. I know it sounds small, but in its day, that was a pretty decent sized chapter. So she went to this chapter, and it was one of the best chapters in the area. And to make a long story short, she didn't join. I knew she went to the group. I ran into her, but she was wearing a BNI badge. And I said, hey, I see you joined. She said, no, I didn't join that chapter. I said, well, why? What chapter did you join? And she said, and she told me the chapter that she joined. The chapter she joined had half the members. It had close to 20 members. Now, this goes to your point. Had half the members of the chapter that she went to first. Chapter she went to first would have accepted her. I was there in the membership committee, they would have accepted her. But she didn't submit an application. And I said to her, I'm curious, why didn't you join? And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, you know, that chapter really seemed to like each other a lot, but nobody reached out to me. Nobody connected with me. No one made me feel welcome. And I said, well, what's the difference between the group, that group and the group that you joined? And she said, well, I'll tell you what, and this is where I first saw the visitor host concept. She said, the first thing that happened when I walked in the door was there was a visitor host who welcomed me and made me feel welcome and introduced me to every single member. And every single member spoke to me and had questions about who I was and what I did and welcomed me into the chapter. She joined a chapter half the size of the first one she went to. And she did it because they made her feel welcome. Now, you have a kind of a two-part question. You say sometimes visitors are hunters and they don't want to join the larger group. Well, first of all, if they're a hunter and it's clear, let them join the larger group. You don't want them in your group. But if they're a genuine individual who's really there to give as well as get, then just make them feel welcome, Sharon. Just make them feel welcome. And if you make people feel welcome and feel part of the group, being a little smaller is not going to be as bad as you may think. All right, that was a long answer to your question. I hope that helps. Let's jump to the next question. And by the way, if you want me to open up your microphone, just say so. I'd be happy to open your mic. Say so in the question, and you can ask the question yourself. I'd love to hear. You have to be sure you have a microphone, but I'd love to hear you ask the question. Next one, Mac, Amit, is that how you pronounce the name?
Yeah, Amit Jinder.
Amit, what activity do you suggest for gaining trust among members for getting more referrals? So here it is, Amit. Ready? Time. It takes time. You've got to give it time. And now, can you expedite things a little bit? Yes. You can expedite things by doing one-to-ones, by doing meetings where you're going deeper and getting to know the person, using things like the gains exchange. But it takes time. I have a good friend, and Mac, you know him, Emery Cowan, Dr. Cowan. You know Emery, yeah. Yes. So Emery wrote a story in one of my books, Masters of Networking. And believe it or not, this is a story about networking in a way. And Amit, it fits your question perfectly. He said when he was a young man, now Emery is in his 70s now. He said when he was a young man in his 20s, he grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. And Atlanta is known for growing fruit like peaches. They're definitely known for their peaches. And he was driving on the highway and he saw this little stall with, a farmer who was selling peaches, and he pulled over and he loved peaches and he bought a bushel. Now, I don't know if you know what a bushel is, but if you take your arms and you extend them out like in a big circle, that's a bushel. I mean, it's huge. And he's a kid. He was living alone. He bought a bushel of peaches and he took them home and he started eating them. And he loved peaches. But after a few days, they start to get a little overripe. And he realized that his eyes were bigger than his stomach and he couldn't eat all these peaches. So he was trying to think of what to do with them. And he remembered that his family had this old recipe for peach wine. And so he went over to his mom and dad. He got the recipe and he came back and you get cheesecloth and yeast and you blend it and I don't know the secret to it, but he made all this big batch of peach wine. And he had a basement, a cellar, and he put it down in the cellar where it'd be nice and cool and let it ferment. And he'd go down every 2 or 3 days to see. Now we're talking about time. He'd go down every 2 or 3 days to see how it was going. And it wasn't going very fast. And there had to be a faster way. This isn't okay, he said. I want to try this. So he brought it all back up. He threw some more yeast in it, threw some, and then threw it in a blender and emulsified it, and knew that that would really kick up the process to go much faster. Took it down back to the basement, and there in the cellar it stayed for a few more days. He went down one day to taste it, and he said, "Ivan, it was the absolute best peach vinegar I've ever had in my life." In other words, he pushed it. He tried to do something that takes time and push it to go faster. And all he did was ruin it. He didn't create what he wanted. Instead, he ruined what he was looking for. That's a really long answer to explain to you that it takes time to build relationships. There's a really good book by a friend of mine that I recommend called The Speed of Trust. It's by Stephen M.R. Covey. That's the son of Stephen Covey. The Speed of Trust. And The Speed of Trust is a great book. I'd recommend you read it. The best way to gain the trust of members is to give it time and do one-to-ones, and you can nudge it a little faster by doing one-to-ones and things like the Gains Exchange. Amit, I hope that answers your question. Okay. We have lots and lots of questions, and Mac, if there's a question that jumps out at you that you think is really critical, maybe you can interrupt me. Otherwise, I'm just going to go down the list.
Okay.
Okay, now help me with this name. S-A-T.
Satyajit.
Satyajit. Okay. So, Satyajit. People have multi-trade, are joining, and are cutting members' business. Okay. Stop that. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. You need to have a strong membership committee. The devil's always in the details. There's always something. When somebody has some issue they bring to me, there's always something they leave out. Maybe you're leaving something out. I don't know. But I would urge you to take a look at, let me see if I can pull it up here. I'm going to show you my screen, and we're going to do a search for a specific podcast. The podcast is about classification cowboys. That's the title. There we go. No, that's not it. Well, I don't see it. Let me, I'm going to look on my podcast, or maybe Mac, you can be looking. I have a podcast that I did called Classification Cowboys.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good podcast, and it's about people who take up too many classifications. I'm going to search on another tablet here real quick. Classification Cowboy. Search. Yeah, here we go. I found it. Episode number 477. That's the classic rebroadcast of it. Episode 477. So listen to 477. Share that with your membership committee. Sit down and talk to your local director. Because if someone is taking up multi-classifications, it will weaken the chapter. On the other hand, you want to make sure that people have a classification that is broad enough for them to be successful in BNI. It's a balancing act, but you've got to get a membership committee actively involved in that matter. Start by listening and reading the transcript for Classification Cowboys. Okay, next. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a question further down the list from Tejashri Deshpande. She says that how not to feel guilty if you know your chapter is in a hole, and you know you need to get visitors, but you also know that they will get to see the real face of the chapter real soon. This will make them feel disappointed. So it's like a catch-22 situation.
Well, I think the way to turn a chapter, to get them out of a hole, is to have the majority of the chapter recognize it. It can't be, I mean, it starts with one person, but it can't end with one person. So I've seen chapters turn around. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how small one chapter was, Mac. It was so incredibly small. I don't want to even repeat how small it got to. That one person came in and helped light the chapter on fire, and that entire chapter then turned around and within just a few months had increased their size tenfold. It was amazing. So it starts with one person, but you have to get other people engaged in the process. BNI is a team sport. It's not a personal endeavor. It's a team sport, so you got to get other people on. Now, if you get other people on board, then you have nothing to be embarrassed about when they come a few weeks later, or they come next week. So they come one week, they see what they've got, and then, if you've got your whole chapter on board and on fire, more people will join. Now the question is, how do you get your chapter on fire? So now I'm gonna to talk about something a little controversial. Let's see if I can find a podcast for it. I did do a. There's an article, and I tell you what, I'll send the link to Mac because it's hard to find. And Mac, you might even have it. It's called Addition by Subtraction. Do you have that article?
Yes, I can look it up. I do. I've seen that one before.
Yeah, it's in the SuccessNet. I may have done. You know what? I have done a podcast on it. It's podcast number 143. Podcast number 143. It's called Addition by Subtraction. So the question is, how do you, what do you do with a visitor when they come a second time because they're not going to be as impressed? Well, you got to get everyone on board in order to get a chapter on fire. A chapter on fire doesn't happen with just one person. It starts with one person. Now, what I'm about to tell you is completely counterintuitive. It's completely counterintuitive. But if you want to grow a chapter, sometimes, and if you want a chapter to be healthier, sometimes the best thing to do is to cut it back. And this podcast and the story that it's based on started with a discussion that I had with my wife. We lived in a house in Southern California at one time that had 50 rose bushes all around it, 50. And we were talking, and she shared with me that in order for the rose bush to bloom, really bloom every year, she had to cut it way back. And by cutting it back, it bloomed. And it struck me that sometimes that's what you have to do with a chapter, that if you want a chapter to be really successful, you actually have to cut it back. And that by cutting it back, it blooms. And so the answer to the question really is to get enough people on board, particularly the membership committee and the leadership team on board, so that they take a look at who are contributing members and who's an anchor. I also did a podcast called Are You an Anchor or an Engine? And that's a great podcast because, you look at people are either anchors, they're weighing down the chapter, or they're engines, they're driving the chapter. And so you want to cut loose the anchors that are bringing the chapter down. And that sounds counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, if we want our chapter to be stronger, we want all of our members. The truth is sometimes by cutting a couple of members who are negative and not supportive and not engaged, you actually make the chapter stronger. And then I wouldn't worry about the visitor because if you have a strong, excited, happy chapter, people will join it. I've seen it for years. People want to be around people who are positive. I could tell you right now that I just did a survey where it's not quite complete. It was a global survey asking what makes a master networker, what makes a great networker. And I can tell you right now, positive attitude was in one of the top 3 points. People want to do business with people who have a positive attitude. So I hope that answers your question. It was a good question. All right.
There's another question
Good.
Ivan, from Saji from Bangalore.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, as a new member joining a chapter in a whole, how does he cope? What can he do? Should he be given the option to move out and join another chapter?
Well, I would definitely talk to your director about that. But if sometimes people don't want to go to another chapter because this one is, it's close to them. So if you really believe that your chapter's in a hole and you want to stay there, then I would work with your director to become active on the membership committee to help turn that chapter around. And I have seen that also many, many times over the years. I remember when I was a director and I was visiting chapters many years ago, and I went to one chapter that was, they were so deep in a hole. And they were in a hole, but they felt they were on hold. They were happy with where they were, but they were just not a very good chapter, and they didn't want to change. And so I said to them, look, I can help this chapter double in size and quadruple the number of referrals. And whenever you're ready, tell me. I'm here to help you do that. Double your size and quadruple your referrals. I can help you do that, but you have to be committed. So I'm required. This is what I told them. I'm required to come once every 6 to 8 weeks to your chapter. So I will be here once every 8 weeks until someone tells me you're ready. And when someone tells me you're ready, then I'll be here as often as you need to help turn your chapter, to double your chapter and quadruple your referrals. I did that for 18 months. Every other month. For 18 months I went to this chapter, and finally someone came up to me who was new in the group and said, I've seen you do this 3 times now. How long have you been saying that same presentation, that when you're ready, you can help us double our size? I told him 1.5 years. He said, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm in this chapter because it's local to me and I don't want to have to drive far away. And but this chapter needs help. They need to turn around. And I said, I've been waiting for you. So my story to you is talk to your executive director. Maybe you can be the catalyst to help turn that chapter around. If that's not something you're interested or willing to do, then talk to your director about transferring. There are different rules in different areas about transferring chapters. Okay, and just know that whatever chapter you transfer to, someday they could be in a hole. You can't just keep transferring. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Do you have another one, Mac, that you want to run by me?
Yeah, there's one from Dinesh Pragati. He says, thanks, Ivan, for the perspective on the performance of chapters. He actually took a look at the ratio chapter worksheet, and he's asking, Ivan, can you please advise on the scores for classifying a chapter in terms of on fire, on hold, or in a hole?
Yeah, well, I haven't categorized them by the scores, but I could tell you that it almost doesn't matter what the numbers are. It's the lowest numbers, whatever chapter you're at, you'll know it. You'll know if you're on fire or if you're in a hole. But what you want to do, no matter if a chapter is going to take the time to do that, they're ready to help improve who they are as a chapter and how they operate as a chapter. And so the key is whatever the low numbers are, those are the things you want to work on. And whatever the high numbers are, those are the things you want to celebrate. Okay? No matter where you're at in the chapter. Now, if you want to determine whether you are in a hole or not, as a rule, I'm trying to remember the scores. Was it 1 to 10? Let me find it real quick. Or 1 to 5. You don't know the answer to that, do you, Mac?
We are starting to roll out the NPS scoring now, Ivan, for chapters also.
Well, that would certainly help. Okay, so it's 0 to 4, which is basically a 5 point. So there's not a science to this, but if your chapter's average scores are 2 to 3, then especially if it's close to 2, you're in a hole. If your average scores are 3 to 4, you're either on hold or, and if the closer it is to an average of 4, the more likely you are to be on fire. So, chapters have a hard time recognizing that they're in a hole. But when they do, certainly any chapter that's, their average is 1 or 2, because the score is 0 to 4, which is basically a 5-point scale. So on the lower end of that, you've got a chapter that's in a hole. Now, having said that, here are some key factors. You want to look at the outliers. You may have some people who are saying things are fantastic, but then you have some people who are saying things are horrible. You want to look at the outliers. So if your average is 2, how many outliers do you have? How many people are saying it's really 0? And how many people are saying 4? Because it's the way statistics work. If your head is in the, and Mac, you've heard Andy say this, if your head's in the freezer and your feet are in the oven, on average, you're okay. But in reality, you're not. So you want to look at those outliers. The statistics can be deceiving. The goal of this instrument is to help a chapter focus on what areas they can improve on. And for that purpose, it's perfect. For determining whether you're in a hole or not, it takes more analysis. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Mac, you mentioned NPS score. That definitely is powerful to determine where a chapter is. And we're just now learning NPS. And if you don't know what NPS is, your executive director will be telling you down the road. But just remember it this way, it's a customer satisfaction survey. So, all right, Mac.
There's a question from BNI Breo's chapter. Is it possible for a chapter to be partly on fire, partly on hold, and partly in a hole?
Well, it's absolutely possible that members are all over the board in a chapter, but you're going to have an average. And I would say if you've got a bunch of members that are on fire and a bunch of members that are on hold and a bunch of members in a hole, on average you're probably on hold because the people on the two ends of the spectrum are pulling against each other. So I would say that if your chapter really is truly what you described, your chapter's on hold. If it's on fire, you know it. You've got a chapter that's just running like a well-oiled machine. Now, are there a few problem people or problem situations? Yeah, of course, there always are. You put 40, 50, 100 people together in a room, there's going to always be conflicts and issues. But you'll know it if your chapter's on fire or not. So I would say that if you see a big mix, then it's on hold, because the on fire and the in a hole people are tugging against each other. It's a tug of war between the two. And you want to put that chapter on fire, take the people that you do what I was talking about before, addition by subtraction. And I'm here to tell you, it's counterintuitive. It's almost like, I don't know if you guys did this in India in driver's ed, but in driver's education in the US, they teach you that if you get into a skid, an oil skid or an ice skid, you probably don't have a lot of ice in India, but if you get into an oil skid or an ice skid, you're taught turn into the skid, turn into the direction. If your car is sliding, you turn the wheel into the direction of the slide, which seems completely counterintuitive. Every bone in your body wants to turn out of it. But the truth is, the safest thing to do is to turn into the skid. So it's a little bit like saying, turn into the skid when you say, cut some of these members loose. let them go because they're not happy. Let them leave. Let them save face and leave if they're willing to leave. And it's counterintuitive, but I'm here to tell you that if you do that with a couple of members, angry members, complaining members, people who just aren't happy, they're not contributing, they're not supporting, they're not attending. If you do that with a handful of members, boom, all of a sudden, everybody's like, whoa, these guys are serious. This chapter is supposed to be run professionally. Okay, let's get our act together. And you see a chapter form together and be much more successful. It's that combination of support and help and accountability. There has to be accountability. Let me leave you with one more, and then you can throw another question at me. I don't know how well this works in India. It works in North America real well. Hockey, ice hockey. I'm sure you don't have ice hockey in India. At least that's my guess. Ice hockey, without rules, would be boxing on ice. I mean, ice hockey players are always fighting. And if there weren't rules, it would just be boxing on ice. BNI without rules would be a coffee club that meets way too often. So it's that accountability that makes it work. Maintain that accountability. You keep that accountability, cut loose the people that are in a hole, and your chapter will be on fire. Okay, enough said.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions, Ivan.
Yes.
There's a question from Ananda Reddy. He says, at the end of the day, it's the individual who needs to be committed and passionate. Do you agree? If yes, how do we get the individual to become more committed and passionate? If no, how do we get the group to become that?
Well, I think that's a great question. And here's the secret to motivation. You ready? Ready for this, Mac?
Yeah.
And who's asking the question?
This is from Ananda Reddy.
Ananda. Okay. Ananda, here's the secret to motivation. You can't motivate anybody. They have to motivate themselves. Now, I know there's a lot of disappointed people right now because you were all hoping that you could hear something that would be the key to success for you or the key to success for someone. But the truth is motivation comes from within. Now, it is possible for someone to inspire someone temporarily. I'd like to think that there are people in the world that I have inspired. But the truth is, long-term motivation comes from within, not from outside. And so what's the best way to maintain motivation? And I go back to an article that was written many, many years ago. It's a little technical. You may or may not want to read it, but it's called One More Time Now, How Do You Motivate Employees by Frederick Hertzberg. And it was in the Harvard Business Review back in the 1960s, a long time ago. And he talks about things that are he calls them satisfiers and dissatisfiers. The bottom line here is if you want people to be motivated, provide an environment where where it's like a stew that the motivation is just cooking. It's an environment that's healthy and excited and focused. And so the key to motivation is about the environment that you create. It's about our core values in BNI. You create an environment by practicing the philosophy of giver's gain, by really understanding the importance of lifelong learning, by recognition. Recognition is one of the really, really important motivators. That when you have a chapter or a region that is really good at motivation, that becomes the incubator for motivation. So the secret to motivation is to be an incubator for the right environment. That's called culture. And that's why I say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you can create an amazing chapter with a great culture that includes that core value of accountability, that's the way you keep people motivated. You can have massive change in an organization, but if you hang on to your culture, you can get through that change. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, I'm.
I'm happy to take another one if people want to stay on for a few more minutes.
Okay. There's one from Taresh Bhatia from Gurgaon in the north.
Yeah.
How do you douse unnecessary fires, gossips, rumors that kill unnecessary talks within the members? Members are using WhatsApp messages and use it rather for gossip rather than opportunities.
Yeah.
How do you douse these fires?
And I'm sorry, who asked this question?
This is from Taresh.
Karesh.
Taresh.
Great question. It's one I'm not asked very often. I probably should write about it. I know I've written some things. I'll see if I can find some things. So I have a philosophy about this kind of thing, and that is clear, open, honest, and direct communication is the only way to deal with problems effectively. So when I was running chapters and now as the founder of the organization within BNI, when I see directors talking about each other, I sit down with them and tell them, you have got to talk to that person about it. I believe that you talk to someone about a problem, not about someone about a problem. You have to talk to someone about problems, not about someone relating to problems. And when I see someone talking about someone, I counsel them. And I try to do it in a non-combative way. Hey, I saw that WhatsApp message. Do you think that a message like that about someone without having a conversation with them is a way to build a positive, supportive relationship in the organization? Because I don't. I think this is a conversation you should be having with that individual, not about that individual. And I have seen chapters, I am so impressed with some chapters where they have seen people continue to do things like that, post messages about somebody or talk about somebody. I've seen them sit down with chapter members and say, this is not okay behavior. You know, if you've got a problem, you got to talk to the person. If you continue to have a problem, you need to bring it to the membership committee. But you can't do this. This is not positive, supportive, which is one of our code of ethics. And I've seen members go, okay, I'm sorry, you're right, and do the right thing. And I've seen members fight it and then get kicked out of a chapter because of it. They got let go of a chapter because. And I was so proud of that chapter for doing the right thing and not accepting that kind of behavior. So if you have a problem with a member, you've got to talk to that member. You have to have clear, open, honest, and direct communication. And you should never be talking about someone. You should be talking to someone. These are some of the rules that I recommend. And part of being a great leader is learning how to communicate with people about tough situations like this. I think one of the best, most amazing things about BNI is that it is a leadership development program in a way. It is a real world, in the field leadership development, learning how to communicate effectively and guide people in the right direction. I hope that helps. And, you know, if you got one more great question, I'll take it for anyone who wants to stick around a little longer.
Okay. There's one from Jitender Birmani, and he says in a small chapter, which is in a whole, the old members are not on fire.
Yeah.
How practical is it to assign new members to the membership committee who are just about a month or two old in BNI, but they have a passion?
Yeah, I think you need a combination, but I also think it's okay to bring in those new members, but you don't want necessarily all new members. You want to try and keep in at least one person with a lot of experience. I also have taken opportunities to meet with members who've been in BNI for a long time, and they're burned out, they're tired. And you can get them back on fire. Sometimes they're just burned out, but you can get them back on fire. I've done it many, many times by sitting down with somebody and having this conversation. Now you have to believe it. You can't be making stuff up. You have to believe what you're saying. But I truly believed what I said when I've done this 2 or 3 times. I remember one case in particular, I sat down with the person and I said, I don't know if you know this, but the membership here really respects you. You're probably one of the most well-respected members I've seen in any chapter in a long time. And I don't know if you just know how the other members feel about you. They're so pleased to have you as a member of the chapter. And they acknowledged that, and they thanked me, and they were, a little shy about it. And, well, I really appreciate you saying that. And then I said, you are a role model in the chapter. There's no question about it. You're a role model in the chapter. And the chapter needs you right now. They need that role model. And they need someone, and I know, you've certainly put in your time and in your dues. They need someone to be an elder statesman, if nothing else. I'm not suggesting you take on a president role or something if you're not up to that, because you've done that. But they need an elder statesman. They need someone who's engaged, particularly on the issues of accountability. And I think you're that person. And I'd love to see you get more engaged to help guide these young, excited members. That's the conversation I have with some of the more mature members of a chapter. And, good people step up. Good people step out. Problem people step out. Good people step up. Problem people step out. And that is what I'd recommend you do. Don't just bypass them, because there are some people there. There's some who are burnt out and it's good for them to step out. But there are some that still have a lot to give. They're just tired. And so it's not that much work to be an elder statesman, to provide, advice and direction. And so I would try to use them in that way. Well, we've gone over time. And listen, you guys, you asked so many questions. I'm so pleased. Mac, you've got to be pleased. There's many, many questions that we didn't get to.
Correct.
And I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all of your questions, but this isn't our last one. We've got another one scheduled, and you'll get information about that. Had a fantastic turnout to this one. I thank you all so incredibly much. And you will be receiving this recording. Yes. I will do another one. Mac, I'm sorry, I interrupted you there. Is there something you want to say?
No, we'll make sure that these recordings go out. I will send even the previous ones in case somebody didn't get the earlier ones.
Yeah.
I will send it all to them.
And I know that some of you, yeah, and I'm so impressed, I've said this before, I am so impressed with India, and I don't say that about every country. One of the things that really I was so impressed with was I saw photographs of people who were in the last webinar in a group. So there would be like 10, 20, 30 people watching on a screen as I was doing the webinar. I've never seen that before. I'm really excited by that. I think that's really cool. If you're sitting there,
I've sent you a few
yeah, go
photographs, Ivan. Just a few minutes ago, I've sent you a few photographs on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And it's about, I think, 110 people group that's meeting right now looking at this webinar based in Mumbai West.
And you got a
and I'm sure there are more like that across the country.
I would love to see those photographs.
Yeah, I've sent it to you. I will also send it to you on email.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are other groups across India that's doing the same. So as I get these photographs, I'll send it on to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you're doing, Mac. You're really helping to build the country, and we appreciate you and your efforts and helping to coordinate these webinars. I will be back next month, I believe, to do another webinar. If not next month, it'll be in January. We've got them scheduled out, and I'll be doing more topics. And I look forward to talking to you, and I'll make sure to leave extra time to do Q&A. Maybe, Mac, we should do a longer Q&A session if we can. Maybe do some of these that are 90 minutes so that I can do more Q&A.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Ivan.
Yep. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.